Imagine that you're in a market town, farms surrounding that market town in 1800. Now it's a market town, so every week there's a market on a Friday. And all the farmers come in, and if you want to get any information about what's going on in the area, you need to go to that market. I grew up in such a town, and the market was held in a building, and in the top of the building was a small library. Maybe it had 1,000 books. So if I wanted to get any information, I either had to go to the market and find an expert there on my topic that could solve my problem, or go to the library. But I hadn't read that many books at the time, and it takes a long time to read a book and find the information that you want. So to some extent, our worlds were limited back then. Now, in 1834, that all changed. Morse set up a telegraph system between Washington and Baltimore and showed that electromagnetic signals could be transmitted along that copper wire over that large distance, roughly 100 miles. Before then, we were limited to just our village. Maybe the distance that a horse could go, or when cars came in, the distance a car could go. But with the telegraph, we could get the latest information across 1,000 miles or more. Now, what it changed was that stock market information could be transmitted. And I think you'll probably remember the movies where there's a ticker and it's punching out on a piece of paper the message. And exchanges grew up around this machine, around this tool that could provide the latest stock prices, could provide the latest information. The equivalent today is the cloud. The cloud is where we go for information. If you take your mind back to the year 2000, the World Wide Web had already been invented, and Yahoo and Google had developed search engines that could rank web pages. So you could make a query and they would return to you a web page that was the best answer that they could provide to that query. Now, to provide that ranking, they needed thousands of machines. They needed to scan every web server in the world. And so Google started accumulating not only thousands of machines, but tens of thousands of machines. And they realized that they weren't utilizing them all the time, so they could rent out some of these machines. So the first version of the cloud was that you would basically rent out a machine that had an operating system, and that was all. And provisioning that machine was actually quite difficult. You needed to SSH, that's a protocol, a security protocol, that you could send messages to this machine and tell it to download software and compile the software. And eventually you'd build up this machine to have the applications running on it that you needed. And that could take days or even weeks. For example, to install a database would take many days. And none of us like to patch databases. So the cloud companies, and Google was one, Azure, Microsoft started another, and AWS, Amazon, started yet another. They began to accumulate expertise in provisioning machines with the services that we needed. At the beginning, they had just a few services. So Amazon had something like 3 services. They provided a database, they could provide a messaging capability, and they could provide some log monitoring capability so you could understand what your machines were doing. Now, innovation happened as well, that people realized that we'd like to run our software on any kind of operating system. So containers were invented, Docker containers, you've heard of, I expect, that we could provision those containers with images that were already pre-compiled. So we could, for example, have a database that was already compiled and built, and we'd create an image of it, and that image could be downloaded onto the machine. So we started to accumulate libraries of images that contained important software. So GitHub, Docker Hub, all have these images that you could download into your containers and run them. And what happened over time was that the cloud providers realized that they could patch your machines, they could help you maintain your machines better than you could. And they started to provide what we call serverless computing, where as the number of people using your applications grew, they would automatically increase the number of machines and containers on those machines. And so they would manage the systems for you. So that's the state we're in today, where the cloud providers provide many services layered on top of the basic hardware. So Amazon AWS provides something like 200 services. One of them is a ground station that can help you manage satellites, that help you download streaming data from satellites, etc. They have default architectures for example, financial services. So they can almost provide all the software that you need to run a corporation. So today the cloud is very different to those early days. It's a place where we store all our personal information. All my contacts on my phone are pushed up to Google's cloud. If you're on an iPhone, you go to iCloud. And what it means is when I get a new phone, all I do is switch it on and it already makes contact with the data that I've got in the cloud and provisions itself. So the cloud today is an integral part of a digital transformation. If you look at companies that have been successful at this, Netflix is one of the examples. So for example, in 2010, Netflix realized that the age of sending DVDs out through the post with movies on them was coming to an end. The networks were getting fast enough that movies could be streamed over the network. And they had to make a decision whether to build their own data centers to stream these videos out or to use one of the cloud providers. They actually chose AWS, even though Amazon was running a competing service. Amazon Prime streams out movies. They thought they could use the AWS cloud better than Amazon could. So Netflix transferred all of their operations to the AWS cloud, and they did it very successfully. Today, they're one of the most successful companies in the world. You've got other companies that have built platforms, coordination platforms. For example, Uber coordinates between the passengers that need to be picked up and the drivers that can take them to their destination. We've seen that with Airbnb. These companies have scaled to the largest level. Facebook, for example, has over 1 billion users. And what happens is that the cloud providers provide free tier layers for individuals, so you can operate in the cloud yourself and teach yourself the cloud very easily without incurring any cost at all. You might have to put a credit card to back, but it won't be charged. The most I've had recently is a couple of dollars every month. So where they charge is when a corporation scales up to 10,000, 100,000 users, then they begin to charge you. But it's very easy to get into the cloud. Now, why should you go to the cloud? Well, your competitors may be thinking of going to the cloud themselves. For example, Robinhood in the banking area chose a certain part of banking and have executed extremely well. If I want to trade shares, I can do it in seconds. on Robinhood, and I end up doing other banking facilities on them. But they begin to know me very well and know my habits. The other thing that the cloud provides is data that if you can know your customer, then you can operate with less risk. And so companies like Netflix can make movies with lower risk than Hollywood because Netflix knows the customers. They're watching you watch their movies and accumulating that data. So if you're going through a digital transformation in your company, think about using the cloud because it's almost essential. If you go back to those early years of being in a small village where your information is limited just by the people you know in that village, today the cloud exposes the whole world of information to you. So take a look at the cloud. I'm John Williams. I'm a professor of information engineering at MIT, and I hope to see you online.